The distant north of Skyrim is a frightful, violent place, full of roving beasts, bandits around every corner, and magical atrocities just waiting to turn you from a person to a statistic, with even walking along the main roads being a risky move for fear of the above menaces or more. Unfortunately for the average person, there is no fighters guild to act as muscle to clear out danger, but instead, there is another group, one with an even older legacy, one that stretches back to the very origins of Skyrim and its people. The Companions of Jorrvaskr, who are little more than a bunch of fancy mercenaries these days with a secret furry club. Sad to say, but these once noble, honorable bunch have fallen from glory more than a few times, and it seems they're stuck in yet another slump. Understandable for those who have been in an official organization since easily the Merethic era. But boy have they found a way to trip over into looking like thugs in shining armor. Hey, I'm the Hearth guy, and while I'm personally more of a mage kind of guy, I can't deny a satisfaction that comes with facing the dangers of the world with just your two hands, a couple of friends, and as many deadly instruments as possible. Clearing a path of glory, ruin, and probably a few broken bones as a giant decides your subscription to life has expired. But doing it all over again because there's nothing better than sitting back after a hard day's work and hearing about all the things everyone killed over good food, good drink, and good company. And that's a sentiment the Nordic people have held on to since before they were even called the Nords. Because in long ages past, when the mighty king from Atmora, Ysgramor, arrived on the northern shores of Skyrim, he brought with him many of his people, to form settlements and make a new life. But then they got into a war with the whitest people in the world and began the age-old Nordic tradition of killing elves. The long and short of it is that Ysgramor and his sons made a settlement in Skyrim called Sarthal. But Sarthal evidently had something important that the Snow Elves of Skyrim didn't want these grubby Northmen having, so they slaughtered them all in an event known as the Night of Tears. Ysgramor escaped with his son Yngel, nobody laugh, as they sailed away and watched the burning of the first human city on Tamriel. It is said that Ysgramor wept tears of such sorrow that they were solid ebony. His son, a master blacksmith, caught the tears and began smithing something on the long journey back to Atmora. Using lightning to heat the metal and the ocean waves to cool it, he forged Wuthrod, the axe of mankind's vengeance upon the elves. And with that axe, Ysgramor returned to Atmora so he could plan a little bit of genocide in return. He did so with 500 companions of his that easily rent asunder the civilization of the Falmer, and forced them into exile with the Dwemer, who in turn made their lives very bad, but we don't care about them today. This is about the winners. Upon the boat Jorrvaskr, the companions came to Skyrim and did a little bit of slaughtering, and during that they discovered the Skyforge, a place of magic so old even the elves feared it and considered it connected to the days before Nirn was fully formed. And because the elves were afraid of it, the humans wanted it, and they established the Jorrvaskr Mead Hall and the city of Whiterun in Skyrim's center, sometime during all this. Although it's known for a fact that Windhelm was built before this, as this was where Ysgramor set up shop after his landing in Skyrim post-Night of Tears. After the killing was done, the first 500 companions agreed to largely go their own way and establish their own legends, like the bunch that went to explore the Rift and establish the first human presence there. If I had to wager, this would be around the time a lot of the old settlements were first established. But as for the companions themselves, they formed into a group of honor-bound warriors for hire following the disbandment of their army and Ysgramor's eventual death. Refusing to acknowledge any one person as worthy of being their leader and therefore equal to Ysgramor, the companions instead established the Harbingers, a role of counsel and arbitrator who gave advice but did not command anyone in the order. Every companion, every shield brother or shield sister was their own person who could pick their own battles. This, however, created some problems as the centuries wore on. The companions became known to most as basic mercenaries that could be bought out for any wars. And as each companion was tasked with seeking their own personal honor, they had no requirements in regard to whose side they take in a fight. Perhaps you can see the problem. As plenty of companions were hired out for plenty of conflicts, they inevitably ended up with shield siblings fighting each other and killing each other at the behest of lords and jarls. Grudges then would form, and any honor-bound ties between the companions were under threat of shattering. So, the Harbinger of the time, Mrifwil, decided that the companions would never again pick any sides in any wars. Instead, they'd return to acting as warriors of personal honor and protectors of the average person, and in so doing restored the public's image of them as honorable arbiters. This rule persists even in the modern day of Skyrim, as they refuse to choose a side in the Civil War. The companions also tend to find themselves being representatives of culture in Skyrim itself, as well as mirroring the shifts that accompany it. For instance, at a time when the culture of Atmora was becoming the Nordic culture instead, the final gasps of Atmoran racial purity began to be questioned, and so too within the companions did this schism form, when the first non-Atmoran harbinger was named. And that schism would almost end the companions when the very first elf harbinger was named later on, causing a portion of the group to leave forever. This elf, named Henentyr, is notable for a number of reasons. Not only was his becoming harbinger a sign of the Nordic people becoming more willing to accept elves based off their own merits rather than their race, but according to Kodlak Whitemane, a later harbinger we'll get to, Henentyr was able to ascend into Sovngarde, a place normally reserved for those of Atmoran descent, implying that an elf followed the ways of Shor so closely that even the old gods of men had to acknowledge that he was worthy to be among them. Where's my television show about this guy? From then on, elves and feasibly other non-humans could become full companions based not on their blood but the content of their honor. Further on, the one known woman harbinger, either pronounced Mach or Make, disappeared mysteriously, and a string of dishonorable harbingers laid claim to the title, turning the companions into even less than mindless thugs. So, another harbinger had to rise up to kill them all, with those left in the order with sterner spirits. And that was Kirnil Longnose, notable for establishing the Circle soon after as a group of veteran warriors that could guide the younger members, and perhaps serve as easy replacements for a harbinger if another one dies suddenly or vanishes without a clear heir. During the Second Era in the age of Elder Scrolls Online, Wuthrod, which had been kept in safekeeping among the Rift companions, was stolen and shattered into 3 pieces. As it turns out, this would not be the last time that the axe that habitually hates all enemies of mankind would get broken. Though the axe was not reforged, the 3 pieces were returned to the companions, but at some point they'd get broken further into 12 pieces. Perhaps this happened around the time of another harbinger, a harbinger named Tyrfig. Tyrfig was a good man at heart, but short-sighted, and that short-sightedness would come back to bite him and the companions' circle in more ways than one. For some reason, perhaps due to a crisis within the companions or merely because he sought a path towards greater strength, Tyrfig made a pact with the coven of witches known as the Glenmora Witches, who held the secrets to lycanthropy. This pact turned Tyrfig and his circle into werewolves, granting them incredible strength but at a spiritual cost. Tyrfig believed it would only be temporary, but instead it tainted his soul and denied him and all the others in the circle from attaining Sovngarde. Instead, they would be claimed by a different god entirely, Hircine, Daedric Prince of the Hunt, and dragged to his hunting grounds for an eternity of hunt and survival of the fittest. This altered the internal shape of the companions for centuries, as the circle continues to pass down the lycanthropy, believing it to be a gift greater than Sovngarde. And from a certain angle, I can kind of understand it. Of all the Daedric princes to have your soul bound to, Hircine is honestly mid-tier levels of problematic. He is, at the end of the day, all about survival of the fittest, natural selection, and the thrill of the hunt. Unlike some, Hircine will not lie to you. He won't stab you in the back. He'll always be upfront about how and when he wants you to die, and he'll always give you a chance not to. He's even pretty understanding and a bit of a fan of irony, as it turns out, appreciating when you, as a possible servant, turn the tables on some hunters he wants you to work with in exchange for saving a werewolf he sends you to kill. But overall, yeah, a definite downgrade from the eternal paradise of Sovngarde, particularly for the honor-loving Nords that make up the majority of the companions even now. As we dawn on the 4th Era, the companions have settled into a kind of middling spot compared to their pasts. They still do independent work away from any political strife, as mentioned before, and work to better themselves physically and honorably. But in the grand scheme of things, they are little more than an elite bunch of mercenaries or huntsmen for hire, killing wild beasts, collecting escaped convicts, beating up random people that didn't tip you, that kind of thing. It's still not a bad gig, of course, and they're pretty quick to welcome anyone at the current Harbinger Kodlak's approval. I mean, Aethys is straight up a dark elf, which is second only to high elves in the list of elves most Nords don't like. But here he is. Hence why you, a rando off the street, will be welcomed into the companions with just a quick interview. Also because Kodlak received a vision that you'd come, but that's neither here nor there. However, the companions, by Kodlak's own admission, is not quite where it should be, especially the circle. Aela and Skjor are frankly too engrossed in their own lycanthropy to be healthy. And if they had their way, you'd keep spraying it forever. Vilcus and Farkas are less certain about it, but if we're being strictly honest, Vilcus does whatever Kodlak wants, and Farkas does whatever Vilcus wants. And this connects back to an old grudge they have with, perhaps, the most undeveloped antagonist in Skyrim. Yeah, even more than the vampires from Dawnguard and Ancano. The Silver Hand. A clan of werewolf hunters that aggressively seek to cleanse lycanthropy from Skyrim forever, and by all accounts, it seems like it worked. Older accounts suggest that werewolves and werebears were a constant problem, but nowadays they're practically extinct in the country outside the companions. The only significant others we see are Sinding, the werewolf mentioned before, the ones dead or imprisoned by the Hand, or the ones on Solstein beyond the Hand's reach. If you take what they do as a whole, you'd think they'd be more nuanced than a band of raiders and bandits that'll attack you on sight even if you're not a member of the companions, but no. Instead, we don't so much as get a single conversation with any of these folks. Why did some of them choose to go down this path? How did they learn the truth of the Circle that no one else knows, not even other companions? Why does no one even try to defend the group that is explicitly doing an active service like the Dawnguard would? How come they are still somehow more competent as an organization than the College of Winterhold? We know very little about the Silver Hand from the game itself, only able to work off context clues, but from what we can see, they're actually pretty organized about their work. Able to plan attacks in cities without alerting the guards, carrying books on lycanthropy, as well as potions of curing disease, which I don't think actually works like that, but I don't know. And forging silver swords, the likes of which can't be found anywhere else in Skyrim. So, we have a specialized group of hunters whose primary goal is to kill wild beasts that threaten the average person while working in a loose organization with no clear leadership, but organized enough to plan coordinated attacks. And they're looking for Wuthrod's pieces. Although, I think they're only looking for it to make the companions mad. That actually, ironically, is the only reason Wuthrod gets put back together, because these two groups were looking for it and they accidentally wound up doing half the work for the other. If you look at them, the Silver Hand can be seen as a shadow of the companions, which was possibly intended, but boy was it not fully fleshed out. If Bethesda had really wanted to make the companion's story stand out, then they'd have made the Silver Hand be mechanically more than just bandits and give you the chance to actually talk with them once or twice. But no, just a few side quests where they're minor annoyances and they kill Skjor, but you barely knew him anyway. Kind of a downside of the whole quest, but that's a downside of a lot of quests in Skyrim. You barely ever get to know the people before they die and you're expected to feel bad about it. As it stands, Kodlak himself would actually probably agree with the Hand that their werewolf blood was a mistake. Kodlak's actually a pretty clever guy, and a lot more nuanced than you might get to know him since you have such a short time with him. Which is why Kodlak sends you to hunt down the Glenmora witches to claim their heads. By using their heads, and burning them evidently, you can cleanse the lycanthropy from the souls of those bound to it, which is Kodlak's aim. In a sad twist of fate, Kodlak dies to the Silver Hand, even though soon enough he wouldn't have been a werewolf any longer and therefore not something they would have hated. Also sad for the Silver Hand because it brought the wrath of the Dragonborn and Vilcus down on their heads, and in a single quest the Silver Hand is apparently wiped out. A bit of a downside to the companion quests is how rushed it all is, much like the college, and as I mentioned briefly. You're there for a total week or so, complete like 5 Radiant quests, and then you're accepted into the Circle and made a werewolf. Then Skjor dies, then Kodlak dies, then you end the Silver Hand before you can really know what they're all about beyond werewolf bad. Personally, I would have preferred a chance for you to get to go on missions with the other members of the Companions, not just the members of the Circle. What's Rhea, the newest member of the Companions, before you up to? Does she have to go through some kind of trial? What's Athas's deal? He's a dark elf but decided to join the Companions. Maybe you could have some cool adventures with him. Heck, Vignar Greymane is also a companion, and he evidently knows the history of the Companions better than anyone, but there's no instance in the companion quest where you can just talk to the guy, have some cool lore dropped from him, or heck, even get a mission. He isn't even bound by the rules of the Civil War where he would have been shunted out of the city if the Imperials win the capital, because Vignar's a replacement Jarl. So no matter what you do, he's always going to be in the city. However, by comparison to the College of Winterhold, the Companions at least know how to do what they're supposed to. All of them are solid fighters, and they constantly train to be so. Although, if there is one other thing that really should have been implemented, was a chance to more regularly interact with Kodlak. Like I said, you don't really get to know him, and having him involved in the main series of quests more frequently would have been for the best. However, as things stand, he's kinda just there until he's necessary. You don't even need to talk to him whenever Skjor dies. At the very least, however, you are able to heal Kodlak's spirit through burning the witch's head in a fire found in Ysgramor's tomb. But honestly, that tomb asks yet another question. You see, inside you can fight the spirits of old companions who challenge you in order to make it deeper inside. So, do they just pop in from Sovngarde to do this? Is this some sort of afterlife in of itself? Are they just magical approximations of the actual first companions? In all honesty, maybe it doesn't matter. They function essentially the same as Draugr, which in turn are their own conundrum unless you're to believe that ancient Etmorans had far greater magical props than I realized beforehand, that they could somehow allow for their spirits to be present in both Sovngarde and these tombs at the same time. I'm sort of on a tangent, but it's something that bothered me for a while. The trip to the tomb of Ysgramor actually turns out to be pretty insightful for the remaining members of the Circle. Farkas less so because he's a himbo, but we love him for it regardless. Both Vilkas and Farkas come to the conclusion that the wolf blood should be purged from them, and with your help they can do that, removing the taint of Hircine from their souls as you can do for Kodlak. Aela, on the other hand, never does, because you need someone to remain a werewolf so you can become one again if you lose it, and also because she'd prefer Hircine's hunting grounds to Sovngarde. There's also a theory that she and Skjor were an item, so she wants to reunite with him, but I wouldn't suggest believing that if you want to marry her. Otherwise, it makes it very awkward. Despite not taking that chance, Aela still readjusts her perspective on Kodlak as a person, and as you take the role of Harbinger and could remove your own wolf blood, you could easily be the last Harbinger to allow the transfer of Hircine's power. And personally, that's probably for the best. Both Farkas and Vilkas describe a sort of clearing of the mind afterwards, a throbbing hunger which is suddenly missing, allowing for clearer thoughts. Similarly, the wolf blood pulls at you, the player, all the time, especially when you're sleeping, preventing a restful sleep. Basically, it's hyper-insomnia with a very, very bloody drawback. And honestly, a personality drawback, as all the Circle are shown to be acting impulsively during the faction story, with little regard for their consequences. Farkas reveals the secrets of the Circle, Skjor rushes into a Silver Hand base alone and dies, Aela directs you to act against Kodlak's orders in hunting the Silver Hand, and Vilkas lets his vengeance consume him after Kodlak's death, something he comes to see as a sign of dishonor. In a funny way, it could even be argued that you, the player, get in on it, especially if your first act upon becoming a werewolf is to not run through the Underforge out into the hold, and instead start attacking some guards. Whether through actual intent or just accidental writing, we see the character flaws the wolf blood may be imposing on the Circle, which is naturally counterproductive to their purpose as guides and role models for the other companions. Now, though, one could hope that the companions could begin to lean more towards their honorable past, and over a generation or two, the shame of Tyrfing can pass into memory. Or maybe Aela will keep passing this nonsense on as she collects the totems of Hircine because every single player is hot for the werewolf wild woman. But hey, at least she's probably not going to be the next Harbinger. Dragonborn is probably going to hold the title for a while along with every other title that they have. But I think that will be all from me today. Thank you, as always, for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider liking, commenting, sharing, and most definitely subscribing. A shout out to all of you, lovely patrons. Like the Harbinger to the companions, I have absolutely zero control over you, but I appreciate you listening to me regardless. If you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a patron or channel member. Both are just $3 a month and give access to a private Discord server as well as videos hours or even days earlier than everyone else. Not to mention, it just helps out the channel a ton and allows me to keep doing what I'm doing. So thank you. All, like, 50,000 view from the last video because suddenly that one got really popular. For some reason. But with that all said and done, I am the Hearth Guy, and I will see you all next time around the hearth. As a general rule, I don't condone stealing. A person's private property should be respected, and frankly, it's just a bad look. But if one had to steal, then I think a very good excuse is because you, as we in the Epic the Musical community would say, have a divine sugar mama who really likes it when we do.